Okay, that's my small introduction. I will now give the floor to Jonne and Willemien for their presentation.
Yes. Hi. Hi, everyone. Thanks. Thanks, Peter. So I'm Jonne van Belle. I'm a researcher and project officer at the Kenniscentrum. And together with my colleague Willemien, we will shortly introduce the work we've been doing around the digital ethicist and the competency model for a data-driven future. And as Peter already introduced, one of the main questions we ask ourselves at the Knowledge Center is, how do you create ethical technologies? And we see this as a really important question, because with the growing digitalization, both in big and small companies, we also see this growing focus on doing it in an ethical way. And that might be stimulated in the first part by EU regulation, but I think it's also a more general shift in society where we are more aware of maybe the negative side effects that can happen with AI and data. But what is not maybe as clear in the EU regulation is, how exactly do you do that? How do you create ethical technologies? And what we see when we work with our stakeholders, for example, is that doing ethics is often easier said than done. And in practice, there are still quite some obstacles that organizations might encounter. So these are, for example, money and time, but also the knowledge and the skills to actually make this shift happen. But maybe also the lack of consensus or the vagueness of what is ethical, like, is there a clear KPI that we can put on it? So they really experience a lot of problems with actually doing this. Well, there, of course, have been a lot of tool sets and principle lists and workshops developed that can help organizations in doing a project in an ethical way or making an ethical evaluation of their technology. And of course, we think these can be very useful. As the Knowledge Center, we also develop tool sets ourselves. But sometimes it's a bit missing this implementation into a complete or an organization-wide way of working, where you can really make this transition towards an ethical way of doing business, including the development of your technology. And so we came across this job profile, the Digital Ethicist, or in this report of Data and Society, which I put a picture here, they call it ethics owners, which is really a job that can take all these tools and be more of an overarching solution where they can really support an organization to move towards more ethical innovation and really facilitate what tools to use and in what way to use them. And so this sparked our interest, and we started to look into what could a digital ethicist in the Belgian or the Flemish context look like. And so we came up with the following job description, which, I'm sorry for the non-Dutch speaking people, it's in Dutch, but I will quickly go over the main points. And of course, we have two actual digital ethicists among us today who can go much more into detail what it entails to be a digital ethicist. But from our perspective, a digital ethicist is the person who is supporting the organization to make this transition happen towards more ethical technology development. And so on the one hand, the main part is about defining and implementing the different ethical values into the daily practice and the way of working of the organization. And a small part is also making sure that current regulation is followed. And I think Edwin will go into that a bit later as well, about the difference with the compliance officer. But I would like to stress that that doesn't mean that the digital ethicist is the only one thinking about ethics in the company. It's actually quite the opposite. The digital ethicist is the one who tries to make this transition happen so that everyone in their job, in their way of working, has the ability to take ethics into account in what they are doing. And so if you look at the tasks of the digital ethicist, on the level of the organization, this would be more strategic task about thinking about a long-term perspective and trying to change the way of working. But on project level, the digital ethicist can also help with doing impact assessments or involving stakeholders in one way or another. So looking at the knowledge and skills, we see the digital ethicist a bit more as a chameleon or an AI translator, as Mieke de Ketelaere, a famous Belgian AI researcher, might say. So they are really able to understand the technology that is being developed and the development process itself, but on the other hand, of course, also the ethical theories and different tools and methods that exist and how to apply them to the technology, all the while keeping a critical and reflective outlook. So this was, of course, for us a bit of an ideal or an hypothetical exercise. We are not saying that right now everyone should copy paste our job description and hire a digital ethicist. But we think this job description can serve as an inspiration and to see like how can you make this cultural shift happen within your organization to have a more sustainable implementation of different tools or different methods on the long term. And maybe for your organization, that could be sharing the role of the digital ethicist among 2 or 3 different employees, or you find another way in which you really try to learn everyone the skills that are necessary to do ethical technology innovation. And so with this in mind, we started to look into or to gather and define the different competencies that are needed for a digital data-driven future that is responsible and ethical. And for that, I will give the word to Willemien, who can explain a bit more about that.
Okay, thank you, Jonna. So indeed, as Jonna mentioned, you could hire a digital ethicist, but another way of doing digital ethics in your organization is to make sure everyone has a bit of, as a basic level of skills and knowledge related to data-driven systems. Maybe Jonna, because I think it's a bit, yeah, okay. Thank you for going to the next slide. So what we did with the Knowledge Center is, and we are still working on it this year as well, but we started last year, is we actually wanted to develop a competency model that really focuses on the knowledge, skills, and attitudes, or competencies in general, an employee needs in order to develop or use data-driven systems in a responsible way. And we don't focus on the technical skills or knowledge, but we really focus on the social, societal, ethical, and legal skills and knowledge. And why we did this as well is because we strongly believe, and Jonna, you can go to the next slide, we strongly believe that it's not because you can technically develop a data-driven system that it should also be developed, and that's in general also it's really more and more rising also in the domain of data and AI. That the focus on those societal, legal, and ethical aspects is increasing. For example, questions like what will the impact be of your technology on the work floor, on society, on the environment, or who was involved in the design and development process? Did you, for example, interact with stakeholders? Did you test your technology as well? So that's why we really wanted to focus on those 3 domains. And so with this idea, we actually wanted to develop a competency model that can be used mainly by HR professionals. Why? Because they are they really interact with the employees, and we saw also some benefits for the competency model during in 3 application possibilities. Let's say recruitment and evaluation. So when you really want to hire a new employee, or for example, also more towards reorientation, when you really look with the employee which type of skills or knowledge he or she is lacking, and can be he or she has to improve further, or maybe he or she has different interests than 10 years ago, and so also there we also saw some benefits for this competency model. And I saw a pop-up with a question on what is it based, and so that's for the next slide, Jonne. We actually started with this competency model. We actually made a spreadsheet, like a long list of competencies in those 3 big domains, so societal, ethical, and legal. And we first looked at our own knowledge, like in the Knowledge Center, they're working more legal researchers, but also more researchers in the ethical field. So we started with our own knowledge. We made a long list, and then we asked also for feedback by experts, experts working in the field, in the technical field, but we also asked feedback to 10 function profiles, and you can see them on the slide. And why we specifically asked feedback to these 10 function profiles is because we actually made an exercise where we mapped all these competencies on those 10 function profiles. So we really looked, okay, business analyst, which competencies does he or she need to have? And for example, a data scientist, what are the competencies for him or her? And so we could also see where the differences are actually between those function profiles. So we also asked them, does this apply as well as you see actually your function profile? Do you also see that these competencies are in your domain relevant? And also with a bit looking at the future as well, will those competencies be more and more important as well? Because that's also a bit what we also try to do with the competency model, is to not make, how do you say it, to not see which competencies are needed today, but which competencies are needed also tomorrow. So maybe just to give you some examples about about those competencies, because it's a bit abstract, I can imagine, for you. So I shortly will go, I will present you 4 competencies. The first one, for example, is I know the different types of AI technologies, how they differ and how they can interact with each other. Another one is that you understand that an AI algorithm actually reflects a societal vision and can therefore never be a one-off project. It must, of course, evolve with societal norms and values. It's also very dependent on technological developments, for example. And then, Jonne, if you could go to the other slide. Yeah. The third one, which is more about legal, it's more focused on the legal competency, is that you can identify and resolve ethical issues related to data and AI solutions by using existing regulatory frameworks, for example. And then the fourth one is I can translate an ethical vision into concrete tasks, specific tasks and roles in the workplace. So quickly, some examples of such competencies. As I mentioned, we are still working on it also this year. The competencies are still the long list of competencies sorry, is still a work in progress. But what we are trying to do now is to really make clusters of it. So it can also be used as an assessment tool by HR professionals. And what we actually aim to do is to provide a tool where the HR professional can select some clusters of competencies. For example, one's more related to the ethical side, one's more related to the legal side, and then the employee can actually fill in this self-assessment. And the outcomes of this self-assessment, that's actually the basis for that recruitment conversation or that evaluation conversation between the HR professional and the employee. So what we try to do is really to provide a tool to get that conversation going between the HR professional and the employee, and not really make a very evidence-based tool, but really more start a conversation about which skills, which competencies are needed for the development of data-driven systems that are non-technical. So that was a bit in a nutshell what we are doing, what the Knowledge Center is doing on Digital Ethicist and competencies. And now I will give the word back to Peter, who will, I think, introduce the next speaker. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Wilhelmine. Thank you for explaining and elaborating on the work that has been done on these competencies. It's work in progress, but stay tuned for more insights on that regard. We now give the floor to Roos de Jong. Roos de Jong, who is a senior consultant at Deloitte and who has experience both in public and private sector on embedding ethical values in the development and use of digital technologies. Roos, I will allow you to share your presentation. Here you are, and you can start your presentation. Thank you. Not sure.
I'm mute. I'm sorry.
There you are. That's a mistake. Don't worry about it.
Here we are. Thank you so much for the introduction and the invitation also to join this this event. Let's start. If this works, yes. I will say something more about myself and my background. I am a senior consultant in the digital ethics team of Deloitte, as you mentioned, and we're currently with a team of 9 people. And we advise clients indeed on ethical considerations in the development and the use of digital technologies. And actually, before joining Deloitte, I worked as a researcher at the Rathenau Institute, which engages in parliamentary technology assessment. And that's aimed at supporting the formation of public and political opinion on socially relevant aspects of science, technology, and innovation, quite broad. But I specialized in the impact of digital technologies. But what I liked most was actually the phase after we finished a report and started really translating the key takeaways to different audiences in shorter talks and shorter articles, presentations, panels like these. Because I really enjoy working with the big concepts and the theories, but I also felt the need to spend more time making it more tangible for others. So a lot of the conceptual work and the frameworks that have been created to understand the impact of digitalization, for instance, really focus on the what and rather than the how. So you cannot really give those reports to an organization or a development team and expect them to know what to do differently tomorrow. And that is what we are now working on full-time at Deloitte, a more practical interpretation to embed ethical values. And in this presentation, I will tell you more about how we approach this as a digital ethicist, so to say. So digital solutions are indeed more and more in the center of business processes, as Jonna also already mentioned. It creates new possibilities, new organizational processes, business models, and it clearly, it's really a transition and no longer a collection of smart gadgets or an issue also for only the IT department. So this awareness also means that the use of data and algorithms are under more and more scrutiny by society, but also media and regulators. So although digital ethicists certainly is not a PR thing or a reactive set of actions aimed to prevent negative publicity, what hits the headlines does actually clarify what is at stake. And it helps also to create awareness of potential undesirable effects and risks associated with digital technologies. And this awareness is very much needed in order to also substantiate the opportunities of digital innovation and to shape the digital transition. So in my view, the digital ethicists can also really help with that, to help organizations think about the possibilities, about what direction one wants to take. And ultimately, you can then also seek publicity with a positive message on how digital ethics is taken care of. In any case, my experience is that it's always helpful to challenge people to anticipate reactions by also asking questions like, would you be happy to explain this solution you created on the daily news, and or does this idea also match the values of your company? So digital ethics is about accountability for the outcomes of your digital solutions. You should be able to explain the why and the how and the what of two different audiences as well. And it's ultimately then also a lot about trust, which is multidimensional. And in order to create responsible digital solutions, it's important to look at them also from different angles. And the digital ethicist can facilitate this process. Organizations can learn from academia, governments, and other organizations, as various parties have already formulated ethical principles and guidelines. But it's also fruitful to gather input from within the organization by conducting interviews, engaging in workshops, hearing people out, also customers or employees, about their view on the role of technology for their products, the services, the way of working, and how they feel about meeting new expectations and taking into account also norms and values of different stakeholders. So really continuously engaging in these kind of discussions with different groups of people is crucial, as also norms and values indeed change. There is no static set of standards to adhere to, and choices will also affect stakeholders differently. So the role of the digital ethicist is to identify such values and understand the context. So that's what we do. When organizations seek our help, we often start with clarifying their questions and requests. Some people within the organization might already be thinking about data ethics, or they have concerns about upcoming laws and regulations, right, such as the AI Act or the Digital Service Act, the Digital Market Act. But it helps to zoom out a little bit and also plot where you are, where you see the organization now and in a few years or in the long run. And this involves thinking about the possibilities of digital technologies. What kind of ambitions does the organization have with them? And is it the core of the business, or what are the incentives and cultures? I mean, are you maybe more risk averse or focused on protecting your reputation? Do you want to just keep up with the developments in the market, sit tight and wait for the regulation to actually come? Or do you want to be the front runner, the differentiator? So both with regard to the technology and using this technology, but also with regard to taking digital ethics seriously. So as a digital ethicist, we take this discussion to the boardroom. What kind of headlines hit the news will also depend on the support of C-level management. It's important to have commitment and have resources made available. And the digital ethicist supports this process of adjusting the journey based on core values, on expectations and needs of an organization. So we really aim to tailor to the needs and characteristics of our client. And in order to do this, we consider their role in society. I mean, there are different types of organizations with very different roles and purposes and domains, and the type of digital solutions that they develop and use. Because also particular concepts, such as digital solutions used in maybe marketing or in fraud detection, or HR purposes, they may be considered higher risk. as they have great impacts on people's lives or individual rights. I mean, biases can lead to unfair treatment or discrimination on a large scale. Moreover, it can matter what type of data is involved. Certain personal data, such as biometric data, are really sensitive, but also other data points can link to characteristics such as sex or health status, income levels. And it's interesting to know that also some tooling is available to, for instance, make algorithms more transparent in what are these factors that are determining the outcome, or to check the bias and reliabilities. However, there are also organizational challenges that need to be addressed. And we look into then also how these design processes are organized, the workflows, the culture, for instance, the level of knowledge and expertise of teams and individuals. And also then what is needed to actually make use of these frameworks and tooling that is available. So mapping out such factors can help determine high impact and high risk areas, and also help determine what's the most suitable approach to support the people involved, and what type of safeguards are needed. And would some sort of light approach suffice, or are the stakes very high, and do you prefer more higher levels of control? And what is needed to actually do the co-development processes and really involve stakeholder analysis and do the impact assessments together and fully implement this? So when working on ways to take care of digital ethics, you can start on pretty much any layer of the organization. You can start with formulating or updating high-level principles. As I said, also discussing digital ethics with C-level management and other stakeholders. That's a crucial part in answering the question, what do we stand for and what do we want to be known for? But you could also start bottom up or in the middle. In fact, also when engaging in discussions on a more strategic level, you will also require some basic awareness and training. I mean, I experienced this as well with interactions with clients, that you constantly need to adjust your language and really work with examples and dilemma exercises over and over again to make it tangible and lively for those who have maybe heard of it before, but don't think about it on a daily basis. So it really takes effort to get everyone on the same page. And fortunately, also when conversations start off a bit bumpy, we tend to end up having really nice and open, fruitful discussions about the promises and concerns of individuals, about maybe the cultures within the company, or who to really get on board to help out and make learning programs or playbooks, breakdowns of the policies for specific situations. So besides this strategic vision, you need to consider other levels as well, and also who in the organization has what role when it comes to digital ethics. So what should designers do, and who is accountable and responsible for considering digital ethics issues? Do you want to have a dedicated digital ethics officer or a digital ethics board? And what then does that consist of? What kind of expertise is needed? What is it, an advisory board? Do you involve people from outside? How do you integrate it maybe with other existing committees or integrity boards that are already doing part of the job maybe? So, and what kind of role do they play maybe also in assessing the impact assessments that the teams are conducting? So there's a lot of food for discussion. And so it's very clear as well that things go wrong when there is a lack of attention on how to really operate a vision or a strategy. It is not enough to launch the idea of installing an ethics board, or let's adopt this specific ethics impact assessment. It's crucial to really integrate those elements in design and development processes. And therefore, everyone involved must also receive the communication and the training of this new way of working. And this does not mean that everyone needs to become a digital ethics expert, but they do need to understand or be able to execute the policies, processes, guidelines, or know where to seek advice. So the key element, which is often overlooked, is really the integration with the design teams that come up with the ideas and create the actual products and services. So that's also what the digital ethicist does, to check for the gaps on different levels and find the most suitable solutions. Ultimately, to this whole implementation of digital ethics will go through all these layers, through the entire organization, and you need this commitment also on different levels. So there are really different elements to pick up for the digital ethicist, and I think it's also in the competency model you discussed. It seems like a lot, but you need to know about the ethical issues related to data and technology. You need to follow some developments in laws and regulations, look into useful frameworks and toolings, and be proactive and able to manage expectations of clients and different stakeholders. But it's really not just about the digital ethicist. Everyone's involvement is needed. So really these leaders of every stakeholder group need to get into the mindset of consciously understanding that all issues are related and interconnected with each other. It is about connecting companies, governments, communities, regulators. We all have a stake in how these technologies will interact with society, and it's really up to us also to define what is just. So if we acknowledge these different roles and responsibilities, the benefits and harms of each stakeholders, then we can really find a way to make responsible solutions. So I want to thank you all for listening, and let's have a discussion afterwards.
Thank you very much, Roos. It was a very clear and powerful message. And you painted a very clear picture of what a digital ethicist can and must do, and how it is connected to so many layers of an organization and outside of the organization. So that was very, very nice. Thank you. We see the questions coming in the chat, and for those who might have missed it at the start, we will go over the questions and have the discussion at the end of the presentation. So we're seeing them, but we will discuss them at the end of everyone's talk. We now go to our next speaker, who is Edwin Borst, an independent consultant in the field of ethics and technology, and who is part, amongst other things, I guess, of the Dutch AI Coalition. Edwin, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Peter. Well, first of all, also from me, thanks for inviting me and having the opportunity to speak, because this also gave me the opportunity to, well, give some structure to my thoughts about what a digital ethicist is. I don't even know whether I am one myself, but well, let's see in the coming 15 minutes. What I would like to do in the coming 15 minutes is share 7 commandments with you. That's the way I structured my profile of a digital ethicist. But first, some more information about me. I started by studying business administration and philosophy in Rotterdam and worked at an internet agency. After that, started working for KPMG in the Netherlands, working on ethics and compliance advisory. And that was not specifically technology related. So that was more about business ethics in general or compliance in general. And after that, I started working for myself as an independent advisor. So I'm a company of one at this moment, so to say. And I'm working for the Dutch AI Coalition. And at this moment, we're facilitating a platform about ethics and technology, where all kinds of organizations come together, share knowledge. And what I'm also doing is working on guidance ethics. I will tell more about guidance ethics in the next 4 commandments, so to say, which is a very innovative and also fun approach of practicing ethics. So we will see that. I think that's very nice for you to know that you can start a guidance ethics yourself if you want to. So I'm doing those assignments for ECP, which is an organization in the Netherlands. So the first commandment is that as a digital ethicist, you shall understand how we are interwoven with technology. Well, I want to oppose, so to say, two perspectives on technology, and I know I make it a little bit too clear-cut. Maybe it's more mixed than that, but for the sake of argument, there's one classic perspective on technology in which we are maybe in battle or in war with technology, and technology is a threatening force, so to say, and it's something that's outside of us. And I want to bring in a new perspective on technology, or a modern perspective on technology, in which it is more mixed, in a sense that we develop technology, but technology also influences us. Technology also influences how we have moral judgments. For example, if we take a look at an ultrasound, which we have the possibility of in the last years, then that changes how we think about the embryo or how the baby within a pregnant woman, and what we think about it, and when, well, we are allowed, I would say, but when an abortion can take place. So that's changed because of the technology. So that's also relevant for how we see ethics and technology. So the second commandment is, you shall not know what is the right thing to do as a digital ethicist. And what I mean by that is, if you take that classic perspective on technology, the role of the ethicist is more to say whether something is, well, responsible or not, whether it's ethical or not, or at least advise on that. And if you take a look at healthcare, then that's the classic role of an ethicist, to help, for example, an hospital in that kind of situation. Well, if you take a more modern perspective on an ethicist, what we are doing in the guidance ethics approach is that the ethicist guides and supports that decision making, but is not the one who gives advice on what should or what should not be done. So for a digital ethicist, it means he or she is not a referee, so to say, but I think the digital ethicist is more a coach. So someone who supports, who facilitates, and who helps others within the organization. I think the digital ethicist helps colleagues to solve ethical issues. So he or she guides, coaches, facilitates, and raises awareness, but also monitors what happens within the organization regarding certain ethical issues or the culture. So if we compare that to the compliance officer in a, well, regular business or organizational context, of course, that's it is a more legal function, but also a more mature function in the sense that compliance officers have been around for, I would say, 10 to 20 years, especially in the financial sector. And what you see in how those positions are filled in at this moment, it becomes less legal, so to say, but also more of a facilitating or supporting role. So compliance officers are also expected to help employees more in, well, reaching decisions, but also in becoming aware of when something needs discussion on whether it is an ethical issue. So I think as a digital ethicist, which is, I think, a young profession, it's very instructive to have a look at that profession, because there are lots of trainings for compliance officers and lots of services where we can learn from. So the third commandment is that you shall involve stakeholders. I think this also aligns with what Roos just said, but what we're doing with guidance ethics to make that practical or concrete is we're doing sessions of mostly about 3 hours long, physical, so we're all in one room. And what we're doing is we're really inviting stakeholders. So participants could, in a healthcare context, be patients or professionals or the developers that are developing that certain technology, where the technology is really not the technology in general. So we're not talking about, for example, facial recognition, but we're talking about facial recognition in a certain organization which is used on a certain, I don't know, a target group or patient group. And we think it's important to really involve them in that ethical decision making because, well, we use Aristotle for that, and he called that phronesis in my best Greek, which is something like practical wisdom, because we believe that those groups or those stakeholders are also able to make ethical decisions or take part in that ethical deliberation, so to say. And the digital ethicist in this process is the one who guides everything and who helps reach that decision, but also who helps others, well, to bring up values, because it's hard for people who are not schooled in philosophy or moral philosophy to talk in that kind of language. So that's more of an assisting role. So with guidance ethics, we also claim to have a constructive perspective on technology. If you're doing a session, a guidance ethics, you start with someone that develops the technology or implements it within an organization who tells more about that technology and how it is being used. So all participants have then the same information and understand what the technology is and what it does. So that's really on a basic level, but then we're all on the same page regarding what's at stake. Well, after that, we define the actors that are, well, relevant for that case, but we also take a look at the effects. And it's important to note that we don't only look at the negative effect, but also look at the positive effect, because, well, I might hope that we implement the technology because it has some use within a certain organization. So in these kinds of discussions, that's sometimes left out because we're only focusing on the risks and what can go wrong. And of course, that's important, but I think we should take into account why we are implementing a technology. There's always a reason. So from that, we then abstract the values that are at stake. And then, And then the third phase comes into view, and that leads to the result of the guidance ethics session. So together we design options for action. So simply put, that are things that can be done to implement the technology in a responsible or ethical way. So, well, to give the example of a car being a technology, you can do something about the technology itself. So the car itself, you can put seatbelts in it, for example, or change the motor. So you can limit the speed. You can do something about the environment. So you can think of traffic lights, put traffic lights, or change the linings on the street. And you can do something about the user, in the sense you can demand from drivers that they have a driving license. So these are really simple examples of what you can do around a technology in a context. So to tell you more about what we have done with guidance ethics, until now we have done 40 sessions in all different sectors, different cases, different technologies. And we also have created a community of moderators. So all moderators come together once in 5 to 6 weeks and exchange cases, but also what they have done within their organization. So they learn from each other, but also between sectors, which is really interesting to have a discussion among private and public sector officials or ethicists, so to say. And what we're also seeing is, while we're doing more sessions in one organization, we get the question how to embed this guidance ethics approach. So who should facilitate this? Is this a digital ethicist? Is this the compliance officer? Or is it someone at the innovation department? So we're more going to that embedding question, so to say. And if you want to know more about guidance ethics, you can have a look at begeleidingsethiek.nl in good Dutch. But there's also a publication, our main publication is also published there in English. So you can read about it, about the theoretical background, but also see some cases over there. So those first 4 commandments were about guidance ethics. Now I have some last commandments that are more related to the embedding of digital ethics within an organization. So I think they are more about how to enrich guidance ethics with business ethics. So now I can share more of my experience that I have from KPMG. And one of those is with ethical culture. So this is the ethical culture model. I got this from the Belgian KPMG, which kind of funny because we developed it in the Netherlands, but in the Netherlands I couldn't find it. So it are 8 drivers of an ethical culture. This is scientifically proven. So I won't go into all these 8 drivers, but the idea is that if you implement these drivers within your organization, you have an ethical culture, but also the risk of incidents occurring is much lower. And of course, the most interesting thing is that you can also measure this. I've done lots of measurements in my time at KPMG, also in technology companies. So I've done measurements at Microsoft, for example, but also at the Dutch railways, large banks. And it's really interesting to compare results, not only within an organization, so you can do more measurements, for example, one measurement now and another measurement in about 2 years and see whether some things have changed, but also look within an organization and compare divisions or do a benchmark and compare it to other organizations. So it really makes an abstract concept like culture, well, measurable. So that's really interesting. So Commandment 6 is about a diversified toolbox. So I already showed this slide. And if you take a look at the toolbox of a digital ethicist, I think, well, maybe the most important one is that you have knowledge of different methodologies, because I got this from the side of the Knowledge Center. So this is a nice overview. I could scroll all the way. There are lots of methodologies on this page. And I think as a digital ethicist, you should know when to apply which method, because I just told you about guidance ethics, but there are lots of methodologies that are also very applicable in particular situations. So it might well be that you have a case in which data ethics is more relevant, and then guidance ethics might be less relevant. So I think it's the role of a digital ethicist to know, well, lots of methodologies and know when to apply them. Well, for the sake of time, I can quickly show some other tools that can be applied to ethics of technology. So this is a code of ethics for AI. This is one from Bosch. And of course, here always the challenge is, well, not to set up or to write this code of ethics, but really implement it. So make it a living code, so to say. So this shouldn't be written and put in a drawer, but it should really have a place within the organization being used. So, well, that it gets meaning. Well, this is an e-learning which you can also make about, for example, ethics and technology. In the Netherlands, at this moment, we're having an initiative called the National AI course. So there also is developed one at this moment on ethics and technology. So in a few months, you will be able to do one yourself. I thought this was a nice tool. It's a chatbot where an organization can upload all their policies and, well, code of conduct, value documents about ethics, and then you can talk to the chatbot. It's kind of ironic that these are a lot of technology solutions for ethics of technology, but I still think it might be relevant. But it's important to implement it well and also have a discussion on it. So not only make it a technological solution. This is a whistleblowing facility online. It's set up by someone who blew the whistle in Canada and got a lot of money for that and set up this company. This is an app where you can discuss dilemmas and see how colleagues think about certain dilemmas. So you can also apply this to a technology-related case. And this is an example from the city of Amsterdam that have a register with algorithms. And the people of Amsterdam and we all can. It's accessible, so you can all see what algorithms Amsterdam uses and also what data is being used. So this is very nice regarding transparency in the public sector. So the last commandment is about a sheep with 5 legs. I might explain it because that's a Dutch saying, but a sheep with 5 legs means that you're looking for a person having such exceptional qualities that they probably doesn't exist. Well, I think that's nice for us being potential digital ethicists, and well, maybe also for our salary or position on the labor market, but this is a sheep with 5 legs. What I mean by that is, and what Willemien and Jonne just presented, there are a lot of tasks and knowledge and competencies being asked from a digital ethicist. So I think it's hard to find one that can really fulfill all those knowledge and responsibilities. But I still agree that it is some kind of spider in the web position, which makes it really challenging, but also really interesting. But I want to highlight one of those competencies, and that is that you should be able to work with, well, developers or coders or technical people, so to say, because I think it's really important that you're able to understand what they're doing on their day-to-day job and what decisions they're making, why they're doing what they're doing, but also what kind of people they are. So that might also be a challenge, and I think this is really different than when you're working in a bank or something, or in another company that isn't technology oriented. So to conclude, these are my 7 commandments. I think I can make 10 of it, but I'm open to suggestions. And well, one of my former colleagues sent me this vacancy at IKEA. So they're looking for a digital ethicist. So I would advise you all to have a look online. It's still open, I think, some 5 to 6 days. And I had a quick look whether they followed my commandments, and well, there are some of it, but as said, I'm still open to your suggestions. So thanks for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion or questions later on.
Thank you very much, Edwin. And indeed, I wish IKEA a lot of luck with finding that 5-legged coach as a digital ethicist. I'm glad you also mentioned our tools page. I can tell you briefly that we're working this year on making more clear when to use what tool, because as you said, it's a long list. There are a lot of tools out there, but when to use which one is quite a challenging task. So that's one of the things we'll be working on from Knowledge Center this year. So thank you. And our next speaker is Kevin McNish, who is a digital ethics consulting manager with Sopra Steria. Kevin, I give the word to you.
Great, thank you, Peter, and thank you to the Kenneth Center for the invitation, and thank you also to Ruth and Edwin for such excellent talks already that make my job a little bit easier. So I come from a slightly different position in that I've been in academia for 12 years before moving to the private sector last March. And so a lot of what I want to talk about was a combination. Firstly, I'd like to talk a little bit about myself, as the others have done so far, and then move on to talk about what I do on a day-to-day basis, talking about some projects that I've worked on, and then thirdly, just some reflections about the difference between working in academia versus working in the private sector. As I know there are quite a few people who might be on this call in that situation about wondering, do I do a PhD, do I stay in academia, or do I make the leap? It was interesting, when I did leave academia, I posted about it on LinkedIn, and it's my most read post on LinkedIn with over 5,000 views. So it's certainly something that a lot of people are thinking about at the moment. So to give you some background to myself, I originally did a bachelor's in philosophy a very long time ago, followed that up with a master's in international relations because I wasn't sure where I was going with my life or what I was going to do, and ended up falling into intelligence work with the Government Communications Headquarters, British equivalent of NSA. Worked there for quite a few years, had a very interesting time there, but then returned to academia in 2007. where I did my philosophy master's degree and then got my PhD in 2014. And the PhD was focusing on ethics and surveillance, which well, as you can see from the dates, that was just when Edward Snowden came out with his revelations. It's a very interesting time to be talking about surveillance. But it also brought me in touch with questions about privacy, questions about security, and automation. So I did my doctorate at Leeds University and then became an assistant professor there from 2012 until 2017. And in 2017, I moved over to the University of Twente and worked there for 4 years, leaving in February of last year to become a consulting manager at Soprasteria. Soprasteria had set up its digital ethics consulting practice about a year earlier, and they were looking for somebody with academic background to come in and help them out. So that was what I did. I'm also a research board member for the International Association of Privacy Professionals, something which when I was in the gap between academia and or looking for the move out of academia, I did the certification for independent privacy professionals in Europe, looking at GDPR, and then became involved in the research board as a result of that. My role, so Soprasteria is a very large organization. It's nothing like as big as Deloitte. I think we've got about 44,000 employees worldwide as opposed to Deloitte's 350,000. But what we do is largely IT solutions and consulting. And those IT solutions range across a vast area of possibilities. Within the UK, we run the payroll application for the NHS. So people within the NHS who use that, I can't remember how many thousands it is, access their payroll on the on a phone through that. We handle the onboarding, the recruitment and onboarding for the prison service. And we've just recently won a bid with the government to manage their debt recovery service. And I'll talk about that shortly. So that's an interesting one for an ethicist to be involved in. But we also do consulting, where we reach out to clients and just do direct consulting with them in a variety of areas, and digital ethics is one of those. So as a result, I both kind of work, there are two ways of looking at it. Either I work as an internal ethics expert or and do it as an external consultant, or I'm a full-time consultant who does consultancy both within the company and outside of the company. So as I said, internally, we largely work on bids and projects. That's bidding for particular projects, typically government, but not just. We also work with private sector companies. We work quite intensively on the bid, and when we win the bid, we then obviously have to then get involved as ethicists in the project itself. And as a company, one of our differentiators we're putting forward is this ethical aspect to our work. So our role as ethicists within that is to ensure that the proposals and the projects that we are bidding for and that we are operating in are ethical. And by that, kind of going back to something that Rose said earlier, it's largely about both mitigating the harms, potential harms of those projects, and also maximizing the benefits, both for the users and for society in general. And then externally, we work with clients, again, mitigating ethical challenges and developing ethical benefits of their work. It's not so much that they couldn't do this themselves, but we obviously can come in with the expertise and save them the time and the effort thinking about this in order to just come in and help them along the way. To give an example, internally, I've already referred to this, the ethical debt management or government debt reclamation. It's a simple fact that people owe the British government money, as they do all governments, whether that's through unpaid taxes or fines or whatever. And we bid to be a part of the solution there as to helping people to repay that money, and have developed a service or are in the process of developing a service as to how to do this. And so the ethics role in that was kind of twofold. One part was, how should we do this in the most ethical way possible? Obviously, debt reclamation has a very bad reputation of people going and banging on doors and taking away people's computers, televisions, and cars. So we definitely didn't want to be doing that, but rather helping people to see what their income was, what their outgoing is, and how best to manage that in order to start to repay the debt over a period of time. But the second aspect was also recognizing that there are a lot of vulnerable people. And many vulnerable people become even more vulnerable when they are in debt. And so we're starting to work with data analytics there to see where we can help people who are vulnerable through their debt and through responding to the problems they might find themselves in. And in that regard, we're also working with charities to provide support to vulnerable people. That was an internal project. An external project that we worked on a while ago was with Harrow Borough Council in London. Now, Harrow is one of the areas, the city areas within London, and they approached us saying they wanted to improve their digital services, but in order to do that, they needed to improve the trust which they had and their own ethics around data and knowledge. And one of the things I think that's already come up a little bit, but is worth reiterating, is that trust is kind of intimately bound up with ethics, and that's something which we're seeing a lot of at the moment. So we worked with the council and engaged with quite a bit of user research as well to develop a digital ethics strategy and a framework for them, which we then put in place. And that led to, as I say, pretty much a 10% increase in citizen trust in the council's management and use of personal data, which in turn has then led to them getting the data which they wanted and were looking for in the first place. So, of successes there. Reflections, I kind of split these up into three specific reflections on the academic versus the private sector life. I've sort of said here, academia more leisurely but slower. I think there's a different pace of life with academia, and one which suits some people very well, and I think suited me quite well for a time. But it is by comparison with the private sector, it is a slower pace of life. And particularly with philosophy, I was finding that it was taking around 3 years between me having an idea and then that idea seeing itself turn into a journal paper. And then, of course, there's an additional 2 years before people actually read that paper and respond to it and get a conversation going around what that idea was. And so that kind of puts a certain amount of perspective onto the influence as an academic that you, or that I, at least as a philosopher, felt that I was having. Whereas now the impact I see that I'm having is much more immediate on people's lives by impacting the technology that we're developing and helping companies directly. I think a third thing here is I found my own experience within academia was largely about finding problems. What were the issues? What was wrong? And how could we highlight that? And this is something which we've seen particularly over the last 3 or 4 years with AI ethics, is that for a long time, AI ethics was all about saying what's wrong with AI when it comes to ethical considerations. And it's really only been in the last 2 or 3 years that people have started saying, well, how on earth do we operationalize this? You know, we all agree that AI ought to be transparent and that it ought not to be discriminating. But what does that actually look like? How do we get that into place? That was something I was starting to work on in Twente, but it's something which has now ramped up and I'm doing much more of now. Because obviously as a consultant, it doesn't help to come into a company and say, this is what your problems are, and now I'm going to leave you with them. The consultant's role is to come in and say, this is what your problems are, and this is what we need to do together to solve them. I think also it's a very new area. Digital ethics consultancy is extremely new. I was doing some of it when I was at Leeds University, but essentially within the private sector, there are not many people in this space. And there's something I was going to put into the chat later. There's a great group in America called All Tech is Human, which if you're not familiar with it, it might be worth joining in if you're interested. That has a job board. So that IKEA job that Edwin just shared is up there, along with numerous others in the field, and it's worth having a look at. But as a result, it's very fast paced. There's a lot going on. And one of the kickers as a result, if you're an experienced academic, is that you lose the time for real research in terms of sitting down and really getting your teeth into about 20 academic papers over the course of a week. More general reflections. Firstly, I think that companies are not as advanced in machine learning as I thought they were when I was an academic. It seemed back then when I was working in AI ethics that everybody was doing AI. These problems were imminent and urgent. Now in the private sector, I don't think that's quite the case. I think the scale is much smaller than it seemed to be from the academic perspective. Secondly, GDPR, I think, is a great piece of legislation, thoroughly endorse it, thoroughly like it, but I speak to a large number of companies who find that it is stifling innovation right now. And so I think there is space in the market for helping people understand GDPR and understand how to work with it. But I think it's also a consideration at a higher level, at a policy level, about how to go about dealing with some of those value tensions in society. Personal reflections on what it's been like in moving from academia to the private sector. I lost a large amount of autonomy over my time. Part of the aspect about being busier is that I am much more involved, have much less holiday than I did, particularly at Twente. I found in academia the average meeting length is at least an hour. Now, within the private sector, meetings tend to be 15 to 30 minutes at most. I do have free evenings and weekends. Again, within the academic world, I was finding that I was working a lot into the evening and over weekends about something. In a way, you never kind of switch off about what you're interested in. I think moving back into moving into the private sector, that ability to switch off becomes that bit easier, which is good. And ultimately, yes, as I say there with a bit of a smile, there is better pay in being in the private sector. So it's not an insignificant consideration. So with that, thank you for your time. Thank you, Peter, and I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for your insights on some real-life cases. I really like the examples of the debt reclamation and increasing trust in local government. That's really sensitive issues that you can also work on as a digital ethicist. So that was quite interesting to hear. And also, of course, your comparison of academic life versus private life. I think everyone can draw their own conclusions on that comparison. So thanks for that. Let's now finally, for our final speaker, move to Robin de Koster, who is an innovation orchestrator. I really like that job title, at Zin, which is Zorg Innovatie, and who is also part of Odyssey. Robin, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Okay, I hope everyone can hear me, and thank you for the introduction. So, yeah, for those who are wondering, for the background, my colleagues kicked me out of our landscape office into this very small presentation box. So that's why there are strange curtains behind me. Let's dive into the future and into the beginning of my talk. I would like to start with this quote of this part of the song from In the Future by David Byrne in 1985. Already pointing out at the idea, can we actually base all our political and other decisions on opinion polls? So it's already a long time going ahead in society that we are making all these assumptions and ideas about data and how we could use it. And also already in modern times, I think everyone will know the film by Charlie Chaplin, where a machine is introduced into a factory and you see all new competences being generated across the company, and also he has to deal with new questions and new challenges. So this brings me to this first big change in this talk. It's the digital citizenship. It's actually we all need to be empowered to actively and responsibly take part in society, also in the digital part of it. So for me, digital ethics is not only about one person, it's about everyone has a part to take into this entire new world and ideas. But maybe just as a starter, introduce myself a bit further, that you actually know and understand how I look at this issue, because thank you for my nice job title. I am an innovation orchestrator at the research group ZIN, which actually means that I connect organization, policymakers, industries, and so on, or as I call them, people, who try to make innovation work in the workplace and on the floor in healthcare organizations, because that's our big focus. We implement innovations in healthcare settings, and we also do competence forecasting for biomedical actors. And from that point of view, I will further on discuss this topic. I think more important in my talk here today is who is Joy? Joy is actually a poet of code, this is how she describes herself, at MIT. And she created the algorithm Justice League. And there also my story and interest starts in digital ethics and more in data ethics. Her research was on the performance of facial recognition algorithms. And she found out at a certain point in research that the algorithm was unable to see her own face. So it was unable to recognize her as a researcher. And therefore, she started giving lectures. Her TED Talk is amazing if you have time to view it. She called it algorithmic bias, where she actually discussed the fact that she was underrepresented in the data set, and she calls this the battle for civil rights in 21st century. Are we all represented in a certain way, in a correct way, in data sets that are used to train AI systems? This brings me to my box, or my question more, that I try to handle in this world of digital ethics. Is actually the algorithm itself. Is that the real black box? Or are we looking at data as being the black box? Do we actually know what data we are introducing into training algorithms, into using it in a digital way? Or do we have a sense of feeling in which populations are introduced in these groups? Data is most often very complex and dangled between structured, semi-structured, unstructured, and we are trying to solve all these questions at the same time. When I'm talking about data for artificial intelligence, I'm really speaking about narrow intelligence, just to be on the clear side. It's about technology that will help biomedical actors to make decisions as a decision support system, to predict outcome for patients, to make certain decisions or forecast needed capacity, to make a lot of challenging, to deal with a lot of challenging questions for the future or for individual patients. When I discuss projects, mainly with engineers or with end users, all these questions that are coming back up are about the data readiness. And this paper by Harvey et al. States this very nicely. The really first question, is the data appropriate? Is it useful to solve a particular task? But then we should be able to also answer the question, is there a correct representation? As when we look at the story of Joy, the data they used to solve a particular was ready to solve a particular task, mainly the recognition of a certain face in a certain person. But when we use that same data and proven algorithm in the broader range of society, it fails because there is not enough representation. I think this is a very important part of digital ethics, and everyone should be aware of this, also those who develop algorithms, that you have to be sure where are you going to apply your algorithm and is it representing that part. When it comes to the medical world, we of course have ethical clearance. Did we ask for permission to use data, and so on and so on. Coming back to the coding bias, and I highlighted it in white, what I mostly see in my discussions from my point of view as an orchestrator, I tend to see that existing biases in human society are actually evolving and emerging to the digital world, which I quite find surprising. So I think there it's very important also to be aware of the fact that, do we have biases in society, and how is this actually reflecting development in industry and the use of applications in mostly in my sector, healthcare, but I think in broader society. Maybe to give quite an example to make this very concrete, a few months ago I was discussing the development of AI in the detection in skin lesions and how data sets were actually assembled for skin lesion detection. And there are, for certain skin types, not enough data available to actually train an AI or reference material available. What I find quite surprising, that still that's a bias in human society, or more in medicine. We don't have sufficient data for certain populations. That's now emerging towards the digital evolution. Also, representation in data sets, then again, and to understand how the AI model was trained is actually critical in this discussion. Many of my colleagues are always pointing about governments and pointing at those that have to make regulations and frameworks. But in the same, and I wrote it down because it's now a very hot topic in the news, just in digital development, who is the government and the society in the metaverse? At this moment, I certainly see that there is a lot going on from company sides across the globe to develop these technologies, and there's not just one government who can actually deal with this question, or one society. Another one I would like to introduce is the idea of probability. Medicine has already been a data-driven, has always been data-driven. It's a data-driven approach we have because we look at the data that's in front of us. We look at patients, we look at information that we collect, and therefore we will act based on our scientific knowledge and knowledge of certain diseases and pathologies. But now the data collection is changed and the analytics is changed. We still need to be in control. So therefore, when we look at the development in digital ethics, it's also a part of being a healthcare actor or a biomedical actor to understand these ethical, these digital ethical elements, to be able to correctly act on output and supervise your AI systems and your database decisions. Another issue that we have to deal with, and I think this is very specific for the world of healthcare, is when we train AI sets, when we use data and assemble data, and we have additional findings to patients, which they were not told at the moment of the original diagnosis, do we inform these patients again? Is it something we have to check with patients when we use their data? So also new elements are coming up, who also are a part of the digital ethics discussion, in which actors have to deal with, because they are the first contact with every patient. And of course, the clinical implementation and the clinical implementations and implications. Can a patient refuse the use of AI for his case? Or can they actually also ask us to keep their data away from AI training? Those are all new questions popping up when we start introducing this AI into the field, and is large parts of the digital ethics discussion. I do think that to optimize, like was said by the Council of Minister of Health, to optimize a population, we need to be sure that the ethical framework is built on equity and solidarity. So that's a very important one. But this has to be driven by all actors in all society. The last one I would like to dot is, of course, a more future-orientated competence for all actors, and that's ingenuity, the quality of being clever. Because, of course, what we are now seeing now is we have now some very concrete evolutions. We see the digital way going on, we see data coming in and algorithms, but this will evolve very strongly over the coming years and decades. We need to be sure that those who enter now the field are ingenious, are clever enough to evolve and to learn and to go on with the entire model and data use. This is a summary of the slides that will follow, but I found this a very nice picture actually to say, if there is a black box inside and there is a model inside, is there a bias in that model, and who actually has that bias? Is it the algorithm itself, or is it the data that you actually use to build it on? The outputs, is there an explainable output? Can we as actors actually see what a decision was made and use that output and these explanations to detect a possible bias? Who is accountable for the output? Can we reproduce the data? If we go through the same patient a few times, do we always have the same output and the same advice or decision support? Is the data robust against adversarial inputs? Very important one. And is it still private? I think all those words in bold are part of the ethical discussion. When it comes to the acceptable level, there, of course, we need to make sure that it is trained, that the algorithm with data is used in an acceptable way during training and testing. I think already that is an ethical discussion on its own. When is a technology acceptable for use? How are we going to test this, to evaluate this before actually a product goes to the market and can be put on the market by a company? This will evolve also with AI methodologies, how it is developed and how it is actually designed. But we need to make sure that there we have some kind of framework to actually test the level of a certain product. Trustworthiness, I think the word says it themselves. Is it accountable? Is it transparent? Is it fair to use? Also, not only from a technical point of view, but also in society and in our case, when we deal with patients, is this an accepted technology? I think also that one is a discussion on its own. A new one to me, which appeared only, I think, a half year ago on my own discussions, is the idea of robustness. Is data robust? Because we can design a certain robustness, a certain data set, my apologies, for a use, and we can think that the data is robust, but can this actually be open for certain manipulations? And I put the article on the slide. This is a research group that actually had the idea, can we introduce a certain tumor, so a cancer, into a lung of a patient based on an AI methodology, and what would then happen? They succeeded in adding a cancer to a certain patient data set and actually make it look as it was real. So even if we design data sets to test AI development, or to develop the AI models themselves, we need to make sure that data sets are robust for these attacks in several ways, or even unintentional when we are dealing with the data or using the data. And of course, communication of the limits, that's also a part of the robustness. When it comes to privacy, I think that everyone will agree that with GDPR regulations and the awareness about privacy, that there, of course, there is no discussion left, but at the same level, when is data anonymized? In medical, we mostly speak about pseudo-anonymization. And there, an ethical discussion now is going on. How much of the data can we remove to make data anonymous and GDPR compliant without actually making the data having a lower value and taking away important data? So that's also an part that I see more and more on my radar when it comes to the ethical discussions. When it comes to the development of ethics and AI systems and data and digital ethics, I think that, as was stated here on the white paper in June 2 years ago already, the use of social partners and end users and technical partners is actually a crucial part. I think this discussion must be going on at various levels to actually make sure that all who is involved in this development is actually also concerned about the ethical part and the use of these applications in broader society. So, and I thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you for sharing your insights on this 21st century battle for civil rights. I like that approach, and especially what it means for medical systems. So thank you very much for that. We will now move to the discussion part of this event. And the way we have structured this, I will invite Yonne to share her presentation again, is to first present all people present here in this event with a statement or a question on which you can provide your input or your opinion, and which we will then present to the speakers and elaborate further on. I have also seen the questions in the chat, and some of them relate to certain statements, so it's easy to integrate, and others we will discuss afterwards or in between when it seems suitable. So maybe first, briefly, we should explain how this works. Can you go to that slide where the instructions are there? So it's organized through WooClap. If you go to that URL or you scan the QR code, you will see the question appear on your screen once we present it there. So take some time and scan the code or go to that URL. You can also work through SMS if you prefer that. It might be interesting to try. Okay, and then we will go to the first question, which is just a small poll, so to speak, to hear from the people here present, to hear if ethics are on the agenda of your organization. Digital ethics, are they on your agenda already, or do they still need to find their way there? you can still see the website on top of the screen in case you didn't see it appear or didn't have the time to write it down. And it's also in the chat. So 3 answers already. There might be a small bias with the people present here. Might not be a neutral poll here. You need to press submit indeed to make sure that your answer arrives or is registered. Okay. So, well, it's pretty clear that people here are either working on it, in some way, which is nice to hear. But I think it's a good question for the panel as well to see, because several of you work as consultants or definitely work in teams or with stakeholders that might not perhaps be convinced of the value of focusing on the topic on digital ethics. I was wondering, do you sometimes need to convince them? And what are your arguments? What difficulties do you experience, and how do you get them? How do you get them on board? Maybe I should start with Roos. Roos, do you have experience with this?
Well, I like to convince people actually, so that's no problem for me. But I think also when people already contact us, they already have a feeling that they need to do something about it. So it's more like that we are still also trying to figure out how to like also really be able to sell the whole digital ethics thing. I mean, I think it's very clear that people can use it and people really want support and help. But it's also still a bit pioneering, like what can we actually really offer and how can you help people the best? And I think it's really all about collaborating and trying and finding out together how to best do this. And we have some good experiences so far, so that helps. Yeah.
So if you say that they contact you so they're already more or less convinced. So did something happen before that? Is it incidents based? Did something go wrong? And is that why they?
Well, I think at least that's what also organizations like Rathenau Institute or also in politics and in the media, there's quite some attention now for indeed the kind of things that could go wrong, the importance of ethics also for your reputation and for trust, and the responsibility to do good also, not just to avoid harm, is I think really upcoming, and I like to believe that that's also a generation thing, maybe, that people want to be optimistic and take it into their own hands to make better technology.
Edwin, would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, I think I agree. Yeah, I also hope that it's some generational thing, but then again, it might be interesting in a labor market perspective that if you are an organization that takes this kind of issue seriously, well, I hope you can get all the talent you want. But in my experience, this is also related to the difference between private and public sector. So in the private sector, it's all more risk-oriented and more, well, when there has been an incident, well, it might be within the organization, but it might also be in the same sector or with a competitor. Then the topic of ethics, well, comes on the agenda, so to say. So then they call. And my experience with the public sector is that they call you because they want to do good. And I don't say that in the private sector people don't want to do good, but well, the motives are, and the priorities of that motives are different, I think. But well, I'm also not saying that that there aren't sincere people within the private sector that really want to do good. So I agree with Roos that you see that more and more coming. I just had a talk with someone from Microsoft who was saying, well, we're also doing this kind of things within Microsoft to anticipate on future legislation. So if you now go to the website of Microsoft and type in ethics, they have a whole program, and I know that it's really well implemented. But they're also doing that so when there's legislation, well, they can influence that, and that everyone knows that they're already doing good and doing the right assessments and these kind of things. So
I think that, sorry, I think that's an interesting point, and also links a bit to one of the questions I also saw in the chat about upcoming legislation and how to prepare for that, but also how it can stifle innovation, or like what kind of impact does it have. But I think also within Deloitte, I mean, I'm within the bigger privacy team, who also started basically because of the GDPR coming up. And now that's a team of 50 or even 60 professionals. And I have a feeling that we will grow as a digital ethics team in such numbers as well, because it is all very much open norms. So no, the AI Act will not solve everything or make digital ethicists unnecessary, like so these open norms really need interpretation, and people need help to also then interpret this and implement this within their working processes. So yeah, just wanted to say that.
Thank you for adding that, and thank you for picking up on the questions, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry,
No
Peter.
worries.
Yeah, just wanted to add some of that, and I completely agree with what's gone before. And also the generational aspect, I think, is significant here. But I think it's not just about companies doing good, and a lot of companies do want to do good, obviously. But also, I think there's also a quieter aspect going on too, in that companies are increasingly recognizing that they are losing their customers and they are losing the best employees if they are not seen to be ethical. It might not be that there's a huge disaster or some, H&M doing the massive data gathering that they were doing, leading to that huge fine. So it might not be something that's really massive and really embarrassing, but there could be just a quiet drip as the best people leave, because the best people care about ethics. And likewise, when it comes to customers, the best customers are going away and they don't keep loyalty. And more companies are realizing that this is the problem and this is the case for them. And I think thirdly as well, investment has been shown, certainly on mid to large caps, investment is shown to be better for those companies which are ethical over the long term. Deutsche Bank did some reporting on this a couple of years ago. So all round, it does actually benefit you to be an ethical company. And obviously people want to do good in the world as they are creating their products and getting out there. But it is, beneficial for them as well to be ethical all round.
Yeah, it is a positive message that you bring as an organization to focus on that. That was also what you were saying, Roos, at the start. So I think we come back to that. Robin, do you have anything to add on this topic?
Not really. I'm agreeing with what has been said. The small difference I sometimes notice, or we've noticed, is that those who are really interested into these technology development, they need sometimes a kind reminder, but that's it. So we do see a lot of ethical going on, luckily.
Good. Okay, maybe let's move then to our next question, which is also related to some questions that popped up in the chat, and which is a more practical issue, I guess, to see, okay, we are convinced, but how to incorporate them in our organization? Should we really hire a digital ethicist? Should we rely on external expertise, involve consultancy companies? Should we have several people having some of the skills that we ideally see part of the digital ethicist? Okay, how to operationalize this? Give some time. And we ask this because it is something that we have been struggling with as well from the Knowledge Center, how to make, because we are all convinced of what we have a clear picture of what the skills are that are required to take up this perspective and these aspects in the organization, but how to especially for SMEs, for instance, how should they go about and integrate this into their organizations. It is a quite challenging task. I see most people find that it should be a combination of the answers above, which is having both hiring a digital ethicist, but also having trained several employees in this topic and make sure that everyone has some kind of basic understanding of this. Maybe first, well, I'd like to hear Kevin maybe first on this topic. What would be your answer? Is it? I'm sorry for putting you on the spot.
No, that's fine. What do I think is the best way to incorporate? Yeah, certainly everybody should have a basic understanding of digital ethics. And again, as an ex-academic, I would say that's one of the problems in academic practice traditionally. Part of the reason I worked at both Leeds and Twente is that they taught digital ethics to computer scientists. But I remember from 2019 or 2020 research coming out saying that only 57% of computer science degrees across Europe included any ethics aspect in it at all, which means 43% of computer scientists are probably not getting any formal ethics training. And that's for those who go through university. Obviously, there are an awful lot of people in the technology space. So I'm just focusing on computer scientists rather than engineering more generally. But 43% of those in the education space are not getting training. And for those who haven't come through university, possibly even less. So certainly it's important to have. But I do think that, yeah, I would agree with most people here for the combination. It helps to have experts, at least just to come in and look at what you're doing, people who know the area, know the field. And this is something which came up in the chat earlier about, is it better to have an in-house or a consultant? And again, I think that, yeah, that the advantage with the in-house, obviously, is you've got an internal specialist. From the consultancy perspective, you've got the advantage of having overview of numerous different companies and numerous different projects which you can bring to bear. And so ultimately, yeah, I think it's going to be a combination of various approaches. But if you don't have everybody, and if you particularly don't have your senior leadership with a basic understanding of digital ethics, it's a bit of a no-starter. I think those are the people that really need to get it and buy into it.
Would that be the first step for those organizations who are still, don't want to say clueless, but still are at the starting point of, okay, we want to focus on this? It can really seem to be this huge topic. Like, how do we get started?
Well, then they bring in one of us.
I was waiting for that answer. Robin or Edwin or Rose?
Yeah, I think start with doing the AI course I mentioned regarding ethics. So when you're an SME and you want to do something with ethics, I think the first thing you have to do is what is at stake, what activities can I do? So you have a kind of view what's possible, and then you can start from there. So I don't think an SME should hire a digital ethicist or even should hire a consultant for that. But just start by being aware what's at stake and why you should do something. And then I think the next step is to really embed that in the functions that are already within your organization. So maybe regarding HR or regarding your day-to-day business. So that are really small steps so that it gets incorporated without you even thinking that you're doing ethics. But that might be, easy to do. So it's not a special function then.
Yeah, I think I also really like the approach you mentioned of having a session with all kinds of stakeholders involved and really have everyone within their own role have their say on a topic or share their thoughts. Because I think it's also, Yeah, it links nicely also with the bigger theme of diversity and inclusion. You really need different perspectives, and you don't all need ethicists. I rather not, maybe, because then you get a very different discussions, which are also nice, but they belong in academia. And I think there is a difference then between what ethics is theoretically and what it can be in real life situations. And then I think it's not a specialization, and everyone has also gut feelings and ideas about what is fair and what is not. And I think you should really tap into that and not make it something very hard and abstract.
Mm-hmm.
I do agree. We have already a few years now, more decades already, experience with ethical discussion boards, also for other questions. And they are mostly combined from different professions, and they work really well in hospitals and organizations to actually reflect on the ethical questions of the organization at that time. And I hope they will evolve also in the digital ethics.
Yeah, I think this comes back to the point that I think almost most of you or all of you made, and that it should not just be this digital ethicist, whether or not this person is present in the organization, focusing on that, but it is this shared responsibility that so many stakeholders have a role in and can take part in. And you don't have to be a trained ethicist to take up a role or a part in all the tasks that are related to that. Okay, then maybe a final question for our audience, and it might be a hard one, but let's try it anyway. So it's not a yes or no question or a multiple choice question. It's more an open question. What do you think is the most essential skill to have as an organization focusing on developing these ethical technologies? You can give several answers. I think many have been mentioned in previous presentations, but please add your insights or opinion or view on this. I see answers coming up. Give you a bit more time. Okay. I think most of you have given some of the input. The word cloud is very lively, changes with every answer. Well, the order of words. I think some words that should be one answer have been split into two, but close this here. Okay. Maybe I'll start with Edwin. You see here the answers of our audience appearing on the screen. If you think back at your commandments, I know there were 7, maybe 10. Which ones do you find? Which ones do you find most essential? I think you told us a lot about the begeleidingsethiek.
Yeah, I also thought about adding a slide or a commandment about courage, because I think it's also important to that you're courageous. And well, in the Netherlands there was a company that hired 2 jesters. I don't know, it's so hofnarren. So their job was to challenge management. And I think in a lot of companies, everyone's saying there's open communication, but when there are really issues and when management should be challenged, no one's challenging them. So I think being an ethicist might also be fulfilling that jester role and having that courage. But it's not in this tech cloud, but
I like the addition of having gestures. Maybe not too many, but just a few might be good to shake up things once in a while.
Yeah.
Maybe Rose, which ones do you find are more often overlooked? Maybe that would be a better question, because I think we all have our ideas of what this digital ethicist can or should be able to do, but which ones are often overlooked according to you?
Well, I'm not sure because I think, as Kevin also really stressed, it is a very new thing, and also being a digital ethicist is still work in progress. I mean, we still need to figure out what that actually means. So I think it is there's no such thing as a fixed idea of what skills or competences are necessarily or overlooked. But I do very much agree with the comments in the cloud, because I think it is very much about open communication and being open to all kinds of input and perspectives and empathy and like understanding. I think that is really helpful also to be able to adjust to your audience and make sure you speak the same language, because that's also the hard part and why it's also so important, I think, indeed, to educate also engineers and have it maybe also in primary school rather than just on universities. I mean, all these education about digital skills and awareness is going to be important for everything, entire society. So not just for the role of a digital ethicist. So again, I don't want, maybe I'm too bescheiden, but I don't want to claim that this is only us who needs these competences.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you make a fair point. Maybe Kevin or Robin, do you have anything to add?
Robin, you want to go first?
Oh, when I was looking at this cloud and hearing discussions, I do agree. The only thing I was thinking of the entire time is at this moment, it's someone who's able to be the glue between everyone. I think that's quite a key element, who is actually able to stick together all the actors and make them aware of the question that's on the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this translator position, as some call it, or you can give it several names, being the glue. Yes, I think it's also a nice way of describing it. Yeah.
So I would just add, I mean, I completely agree with what's been said before about open communication. I would want to also sort of extend that, really. Edwin mentioned the whistleblowing app. I think a company which is very clear that it endorses whistleblowing, I think, is really helpful when it comes to mitigating problems, because people will see problems, people recognize problems, and if a company is open to receiving those, that helps. And so that kind of is on the mitigation side, and on the advancing and doing what's right side, then I think one thing which isn't here is company values. And that's something which I actually see quite a lot of, that when senior leadership teams, when C-suite executives set values and live by those values and model them for the company, that does filter down through the rest of the company. And so there are companies that want to be ethical because that's the tone that is set by the top. And so I think that's one thing which is actually missing from here and would be quite a good thing. It's very easy, and again, when I used to teach values and codes of conduct, I used to be quite cynical about them. I've actually become far less so in recent years.
I think it's a very good addition to have this organizational view on what the values are that they want to support. I guess that's a way of kind of summarizing what you just said, Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely. And it becomes a compass whereby you can say, look, that doesn't align with our values, therefore we should not be doing it. And that it gives you an external source of authority within the company to challenge a decision which is taking the company in an unethical direction, by saying, look, we have said that we will always be honest. This particular piece of technology involves trickery or subterfuge of some sort, therefore we should not be doing it. And it helps to have that discussion, which if you didn't have those values might not be there.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that you see in the tech sector now that engineers are really willing to speak up, but that's also because they're so wanted, or they can simply switch jobs. So it's really typical that you can then see that it's easier to speak up if your job's at stake, but well, whatever, I go to another tech company. So, well, I think that's interesting, and that might also be of influence that tech companies well, have more interest in ethics, because they simply have to. Otherwise, well, people just speak up and go to another tech company or leave tech.
Yeah, it's a nice way of employees having something to say at how a company evolves and the choices it makes. So
yeah.
Okay, well. Thank you very much for your input. One of our values is that we try to stick to the time that we present. So we were, I see we're 2 minutes to 6, and that's the time that we have foreseen for this data date. And I think it was a very interesting session, both the presentations, very valuable, and also your input in the discussion. So big thank you to the speakers who were here today, and to everyone present and taking part in the discussion and the questions we asked. Thank you very much. In the coming days, a full report of this data date will appear on our website, with also the presentations and recording of this session. So please spread it to others that you know that might also should have been here. They get a second chance afterwards. So all that is left is for me to thank you all for being here and wish you a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.